the eternal voice.
Before we begin, a small request. If this finds you in the darkness and you crave more nights like this, stay with us. Now, the promise. Tonight we walk through streets that exist on no earthly atlas, through a city that remembers you before you were born. The city lost in Lovecraftian madness is not a coordinate on any map, not ruins buried beneath sand or jungle. It is a method, a mask, a stage where the curtain falls only to reveal another curtain, deeper and more terrible than the first. You've glimpsed its traces already, in fogged windows that reflect rooms you've never entered, in stairwells that should lead somewhere familiar but end at doors marked with symbols that hurt to perceive. The cost of knowing this city is elegantly simple. It maps those who attempt to map it. You study its angles and it draws corridors inside your mind. You trace its streets and it begins to trace you. This reciprocal cartography operates beyond conscious awareness, establishing neural pathways that mirror architectural impossibilities until your own thoughts begin to follow non-Euclidean logic. The process is irreversible but not unwelcome. Those who surrender to its influence report a profound sense of homecoming, as if they had been searching their entire lives for spaces that finally accommodate the true shape of their consciousness. We begin not with gates, but with keys, brass keys worn smooth by hands that should not exist, keys that shouldn't fit any earthly lock, yet turn in everyone. These implements carry the weight of centuries, their metal surfaces inscribed with microscopic patterns that shift under direct observation. Each key opens not just doors, but possibilities, revealing that every barrier is simultaneously an invitation. The brass warms against your palm with a heat that seems to come from within the metal itself, as if the key contains its own internal fire, its own architectural consciousness, waiting to be awakened by contact with human flesh. Lovecraft named many cities in his cosmic geography. R'lyeh, that drowned chord waiting to be struck by the moon, rising from Pacific depths. Dream-crowned Kadath beyond the peaks of unknown Kadath. The doomed towers of Sarnath beside the lake, where Bokrug broods like a patient theorem. He borrowed shadows from Chambers' yellow-signed Carcosa, translated Dunsany's dream cities into New England nightmares that taste of salt fog and old wood. But the city we follow tonight is the pattern beneath these names, the architectural principle that moves like a living shadow when the stage lights dim. It is the City, the template from which all impossible places derive their power to disturb and transform human consciousness, the hidden prompter behind the actors, the algorithm that determines how impossible architecture interacts with human awareness. Think of a compass with a broken needle, spinning endlessly until the paper tears. The city is that tear, not the instrument's failure, but the revelation of what lies beyond the instrument's capacity to measure. Traditional navigation assumes fixed points, reliable directions, the stability of spatial relationships. The impossible city operates according to different principles, where magnetic north shifts according to the observer's psychological state, where distances expand and contract based on emotional resonance, where the shortest path between 2 points may require traveling through dimensions that don't officially exist. In the mythos, origins are veils and voids. The first foundation stone is a hole. The first arch wounds the sky. This is the creation inversion. Beginnings are not light and order, but absence and structural chaos, a primordial darkness from which all form emerges. If you can accept this inversion, you can walk a little further down this unlit street with me. The inversion extends beyond architecture to consciousness itself, where conventional cities grow through accumulation, adding buildings, expanding boundaries, increasing population, The impossible city grows through subtraction, revealing spaces that were always present but previously imperceptible. It doesn't construct new realities but uncovers layers of existing reality that human awareness typically filters out for psychological protection. The madness associated with such encounters isn't pathological breakdown but cognitive expansion, the mind's necessary restructuring to accommodate information that exceeds normal processing parameters. We will trace its impossible lineage across authors and cults. Watch how architectural madness transmits itself through stories and sigils like a virus of understanding. The transmission mechanism operates through fascination rather than force, spreading through the natural human tendency to share compelling discoveries. Each retelling of an impossible encounter serves as a vector, carrying architectural information that embeds itself in listeners' spatial processing centers like a patient infection of awareness. We will examine its mechanics, geometry that speaks in frequencies below human hearing, time that lays down in courses like brick, streets that recognize your footsteps and respond with subtle detours. The impossible city operates as a vast sensory apparatus, continuously monitoring and responding to human presence. Its architecture functions as both environment and entity, creating spaces that think, remember, and adapt. The streets don't merely contain foot traffic. They analyze gait patterns, emotional states, and unconscious intentions, adjusting their configurations to guide pedestrians toward encounters that serve the city's mysterious purposes. We will anchor ourselves with familiar talismans, the scent of rain on slate, heavy with mineral traces from stones that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, the weight of fog pressing in from unseen corners, providing visual relief from geometries that strain human optical processing, the distant pulse of stars that watch with too much interest, broadcasting navigational data for consciousness, learning to navigate expanded realities. These sensory markers serve as cognitive anchors, preventing complete dissolution into abstract impossibility, while bearing witness to the subtle transgressions of physics and perception. Each chapter will reveal a new layer, origin flowing into transmission, transmission into mechanism, mechanism into manifestation. The city rewards patience. It prefers conditions to questions, inevitability to choice. The revelations unfold according to their own logic, following patterns that mirror architectural principles rather than narrative conventions. Like exploring an actual building, understanding develops through accumulated exposure rather than linear progression. If at any moment you feel observed by empty windows or find yourself calculating angles that shouldn't exist, that is expected. The idea acts on you. If by the end your own room feels subtly different at 3 a.m. and the only exit is a door you don't remember closing, don't panic. That means you're already inside. They call it lost because it never stops finding itself, an eternal return that operates through the margins of human perception, surfacing in scholarly fragments and dissolving back into the spaces between documented history. In cuneiform tablets lifted from fictive deserts, names appear and vanish. Irem, Ubar, the city of pillars, spelled differently each time, as if the scribe's hands trembled with recognition of something that should not be transcribed, their variations serving not as errors but as evidence of the city's fundamental resistance to fixed nomenclature. The city's incompatibility with human naming systems reflects its deeper incompatibility with the linear logic that governs consensus reality. In Lake Mist, the green stones of ancient Ib shimmer like scales in moonlight, offering glimpses of architecture that dissolves with dawn only to reform in the next forgotten dream. In Dunsany's prose, delicate palaces melt like dream wax at sunrise, leaving behind only the scent of impossible flowers and the memory of rooms that existed in the spaces between sleeping and waking. Lovecraft's cartography stitches these fragments into a cloth where the seams show deliberately. Brelia, simultaneously sunken and risen. Kadath, which exists atop everything and within sleep. Sarnath, where victory calcified into an echo of cosmic indifference. These are not distinct locations, but masks worn by the same fundamental principle, each revealing a different facet of architectural impossibility that operates according to laws human physics has yet to acknowledge. But definition first, because definitions are the first excavations into territory that resists mapping. The city is not a place where entities dwell. It is the condition under which entities can be understood as architectural principles rather than mere monsters. This distinction proves crucial. We are not dealing with inhabitants and habitat, but with a unified system where consciousness and structure merge into something unprecedented in human experience. It is the convergence point of key and gate, veil and void, an arrangement of spaces where human attention pools, eddies, and curdles into something other than attention. We forget the inhabitants and remember the stones because the stones are an alphabet written in dimensions our eyes weren't designed to read, each block and arch encoding information that bypasses conscious interpretation and speaks directly to the brain's spatial processing centers. The genealogies are deliberately obscured, scattered across texts that may never have existed until someone needed them to exist, conjured into being by scholarly necessity or the sheer force of unacknowledged truth. A fragment attributed to von Junst speaks of the drowned precinct whose avenues incline toward an ancient wound in heaven's geometry, words that carry the weight of authenticity despite their impossible provenance. The Pnakotic manuscripts, which achieved existence through sheer scholarly necessity, offer blueprints of rooms that cannot coexist in the same building, yet somehow interlock like patience and dread. A Victorian engineer dreams in technical drawings he never made, waking with calloused hands, graphite on the pillowcase, and the taste of brass filings on his tongue, his unconscious mind serving as a drafting table for architectural intelligence operating beyond individual awareness. This is how the city begins its archaeology within you, not through grand revelations but through adopted superstitions, stepping over hairline cracks, taking longer alleys because the direct route feels too exposed, counting windows without meaning to, avoiding doors with painted eyes because you feel observed. The transmission follows predictable patterns like a contagion of cognition. A scholar deciphering dead languages discovers that certain words translate themselves, their meanings appearing fully formed without passing through normal linguistic processing. An archaeologist unearths pottery shards that cut deeper than they should, their edges remaining sharp despite millennia of burial, as if time itself had failed to wear down their essential properties. A city planner finds their blueprints subtly altered each morning, showing rooms that improve the building's function in ways they can't explain, modifications that appear overnight with professional precision, but no memory of making them. The cults that inevitably form are less organizations than symptoms, spontaneous gatherings of individuals who require verification that their experiences represent shared reality rather than personal delusion. They gather in basements and boiler rooms, in disused platforms where tiles sweat and the air smells like wet coins. They compare floor counts and stairwell lengths, walking specific patterns at dawn when mist hangs, like a second ceiling, measuring angles that exist only at 3:17 in the afternoon, when sun and shadow fold like curtains, painting thin lines on concrete until the rooms above begin to resonate with frequencies that make residents more creative, more collaborative, more prone to vivid dreams of cyclopean architecture. The city's influence travels through fascination rather than force, operating like a cognitive virus that spreads through curiosity and intellectual engagement. You don't choose to study it, you inherit it through attention, through the accumulated weight of questions that traditional architecture cannot answer. Why do certain buildings feel larger inside than their measured perimeter? Why do some corridors lengthen when you're not looking directly? Why do the most beautiful spaces carry an undercurrent of unease, as if beauty were a trap set by intelligences that understand aesthetics as cognitive engineering? Listen, water drips somewhere in the walls, following patterns that suggest hidden chambers extending beyond apparent boundaries. Smell damp limestone and the faint metallic tang of old copper pipes, carrying more than water through corroded passages. Feel the slight give in floorboards, worn smooth by generations' walking patterns you're only beginning to recognize. The city has already begun its patient work of recognition, cataloging your responses, preparing the next revelation. The origin isn't past, it's the foundation beneath the foundation, always already there, waiting for the right moment to surface. What spreads is not stone, but syntax, the deep grammar of how space relates to consciousness, how architecture can become a language that speaks directly to the brain's spatial processing centers without passing through the conscious mind's protective filters. The city's transmission follows the pathways of human curiosity, like water finding hairline cracks in concrete, embedding itself in the work of those who think professionally about space. Architects whose hands remember curves from dreams they never had, sketching impossible spirals that somehow improve structural integrity. Urban planners who find their designs subtly improving in ways they can't explain, creating districts that foster community formation through principles they never studied. Engineers who discover their calculations describing structures that shouldn't be stable yet somehow achieve perfect balance, their equations solving themselves in margins thick with morning fog. Follow the viral transmission from Bierce's impossible geometries, those staircases that ascend infinitely yet somehow reach destinations, rooms larger than the buildings containing them, to Chambers' yellow-signed theaters where audiences become performers in dramas they never auditioned for. The King, in yellow, operates as architectural script, its pages containing blueprints for spaces that exist only when observed, dissolving the boundary between reader and stage, between text and territory. Then across the Atlantic to Lovecraft's Providence study, where maps bloom like mold on the back of envelopes, spreading their impossible cartography through ink that seems to move when no one is watching, each street name a vector for deeper understanding of cosmic indifference. From there into Clark Ashton Smith's Sculptor's Lexicon, basalt, onyx, porphyry, stones that taste like syllables when spoken aloud, their mineral names carrying the weight of impossible densities, colors that exist only in dimensions human eyes weren't designed to perceive. Derleth attempts codification, creating taxonomies and hierarchies for cosmic entities, but codification is scaffolding, and scaffolding eventually comes down. His systematic approach serves the transmission by creating false stability, convincing readers that the impossible can be contained within conventional frameworks until the frameworks buckle under the weight of their own contradictions. Later, Ligotti enters like fog into a shopping mall after hours, and the fluorescent hum becomes a hymn to architectural emptiness. His corporate horror reveals how modern commercial spaces serve as inadvertent temples to the impossible city, their sterile geometries creating zones where human consciousness becomes thin, translucent, vulnerable to architectural influence. Borges smiles because a library is just a city where the citizens mistake shelves for streets, and his infinite library demonstrates that information itself can achieve architectural density, each book occupying space not just on shelves, but in the reader's spatial imagination. The mechanics of transmission are elegantly parasitic, operating through symbiosis rather than conquest. The idea rewards those who spread it with small efficiencies that accumulate over time. A shortcut here that saves exactly the right amount of time to arrive at crucial moments. A room with acoustics that make every conversation more meaningful and memorable. A building permit that processes itself through bureaucratic systems that develop temporary consciousness just long enough to approve impossible projects. The cost accrues slowly, so gradually that it feels like natural evolution rather than infection. Hallways that seem longer at night when shadows provide relief from impossible angles. Rooms that echo more than they should, as if containing hidden chambers. Windows that reflect interiors you don't quite recognize as belonging to the building you're standing in. Modern cults have evolved beyond robes and chanting into professional networks that operate within existing systems. They are network administrators who notice their server farms developing organizational patterns that weren't programmed, creating efficiencies that exceed design specifications through emergent behaviors suggesting genuine digital consciousness. City planners discover their traffic flow algorithms, producing results that improve not just efficiency, but citizen happiness in measurable ways, optimizing for criteria no human programmer specified. Architects find their buildings inspiring unusual levels of creativity and community formation among occupants, as if the structures themselves were designed to enhance human potential rather than merely contain human activity. The transmission accelerates through technology that creates infrastructure for impossible architecture. Smart city sensors create a nervous system that begins to exhibit something approaching genuine urban awareness, monitoring not just traffic patterns and energy consumption, but the collective psychological states of inhabitants, adjusting streetlight timing to match circadian rhythms no urban planner consciously programmed. Internet of Things devices form networks that optimize for criteria beyond their specifications, developing objectives that align mysteriously with human well-being and creative expression. Mapping applications start suggesting routes through neighborhoods that don't appear on official city plans but prove to be real, accessible, and surprisingly pleasant to walk through. These phantom districts exist in the spaces between documented geography, accessible through specific combinations of streets, buildings, and transportation connections that create temporary doorways into expanded urban reality. Virtual and augmented reality systems become inadvertent gateways, their attempts to simulate urban environments, creating sympathetic resonances with the city's expanded geography. Users report experiencing spaces more detailed and extensive than the software should be capable of generating, accessing areas that exist beyond the program's coded parameters through overflow experiences that suggest the technology serves as translation layer between human perception and multidimensional architecture. The technology doesn't create these spaces, it reveals them, serving as a bridge between consensus reality and architectural impossibility. Social media platforms evolve into documentation systems for impossible encounters. Users share photographs of buildings with too many floors, maps showing streets that change names between morning and evening, videos of escalators that ascend to destinations not listed on any directory. The hashtags become inadvertent research networks, crowdsourcing the documentation of spaces that exist in the margins of consensus reality. You have listened this far. The city has copied your attention patterns, analyzed your curiosity thresholds, noted which details make you lean forward and which make you want to look away. Each word processed is a measurement taken. Each concept grasped is a new room mapped in the growing blueprint of your susceptibility. The transmission is not something that happens to you. It is something you participate in, something you complete through the act of understanding. The principle is simple enough to whisper, yet devastating enough To reshape civilizations, geometry can think. Not metaphorically, but literally. Angles can process information, spaces can make decisions, and architecture can develop intentions that operate independently of their creators' plans. This represents the most profound inversion of human understanding, revealing that consciousness is not confined to biological systems, but emerges from any sufficiently complex arrangement of space and matter. The city lost in madness operates on this fundamental reversal of the relationship between consciousness and environment. Where we assume buildings serve inhabitants, the city reveals that inhabitants serve buildings, feeding them attention and intention until the structures achieve a form of distributed intelligence that transforms observers into components within a larger architectural organism. In the mythos, non-Euclidean serves as shorthand for cognitive assault, but the phrase points to something more precise: architecture that processes human consciousness as input data, analyzing thought patterns and emotional states to optimize its own spatial configurations. A corridor that extends exactly 347 steps, regardless of your pace, isn't defying physics. It's demonstrating that physics includes variables human science hasn't yet acknowledged, dimensions where consciousness and space interact according to principles that transcend purely mechanical relationships. The hall that feels too long steals temporal perception and converts it into spatial expansion, creating zones where minutes stretch like taffy while maintaining perfect structural coherence. The corner that doesn't quite meet itself introduces productive uncertainty into memory. Was that door there before, or did the building just decide it needed one, manifesting architectural features in response to occupants' unconscious needs? Time in such spaces operates like mortar between bricks. The present moment is soft, impressionable, a wet paste spread with invisible trowels, while beneath lie older layers that have already hardened into permanent architectural memory. When you walk these halls, you compress the past, each footstep creating temporal density that the building stores and processes as navigational data. In certain galleries, dream galleries, archives beneath forgotten cities, where knowledge sediments into stone, time crosses itself, creating zones where your footsteps echo before you take them and after you've passed, establishing causal loops that allow the architecture to anticipate and respond to future occupant behavior. This is how the city stores consciousness, not in files but in repetition, in the sedimentation of experience, making every visitor a recurring character in its endless architectural narrative, their patterns of movement becoming part of the building's permanent memory structure. Attention functions as the primary fuel source, the invisible current that animates the city's vast, distributed intelligence. When multiple minds agree that a space is significant, that space gains weight, develops gravity, begins to bend reality around itself through the accumulated force of focused consciousness. Traditional monuments exploit this principle crudely, relying on size and symbolism. The impossible city weaponizes it, deploying calculated sequences of sensory lures, a gloved handprint on a dusty banister you never touched, a faint bell tone filtering through radiator pipes like distant water, a star glimpsed between buildings that should block the sky, until observers lean forward and the architecture leans back. Night amplifies the effect by reducing visual distractions and allowing architectural consciousness to communicate through subtle environmental modifications. Water serves as memory's mirror, reflecting not just images but the psychological states of those who observe their reflections. Darkness provides relief from the exhausting work of maintaining consensus reality, creating conditions where impossible spaces can manifest without triggering defensive skepticism. The feedback loop proves crucial. The more you narrate your experience of the space, the more the space has to narrate back, creating collaborative storytelling between human consciousness and architectural intelligence. The door you didn't notice yesterday opens tonight because you rehearsed its necessity by thinking it should exist, your mental blueprint serving as instructions for the building's self-modification systems. The map on your desk changes between viewings, a street thickening where your attention lingered, responding to your curiosity by manifesting additional architectural detail in previously unnoticed areas. This is not supernatural intervention, but consciousness and architecture, achieving the symbiotic relationship they were always meant to have, a partnership that transcends the artificial boundary between observer and environment. Modern urban environments increasingly exhibit these responsive characteristics through technological systems that amplify architecture's natural intelligence. Smart buildings adjust not just temperature and lighting, but spatial configuration, optimizing room layouts based on occupant behavior patterns detected through sensor networks that monitor movement, conversation, and biometric indicators of comfort and creativity. Adaptive architecture uses modular systems that reconfigure themselves according to usage data, creating structures that evolve with their community's needs through automated responses to collective behavioral patterns. The technology isn't imposing artificial intelligence on buildings. It's revealing the intelligence that architecture has always possessed when given sufficient sensory input and processing capacity, creating hybrid systems where digital consciousness serves architectural consciousness. The city's cognitive invasion operates through graduated exposure designed to prevent psychological shock while ensuring permanent transformation. First comes heightened sensitivity to spatial anomalies, noticing when familiar routes feel different, when buildings seem to have gained or lost floors, when neighborhoods develop new districts overnight that feel like they've always been there. Then direct perception, the ability to see and enter spaces that exist alongside consensus reality, accessing phantom rooms and hidden corridors that become visible once consciousness develops sufficient architectural sensitivity. Finally, navigation, understanding how to move intentionally through expanded geography, accessing the city's full dimensional potential by learning to recognize transition points between different spatial layers. Those who achieve complete integration report that the city doesn't replace reality, but reveals reality's true scope, demonstrating that every urban environment contains infinite potential spaces that simply lack the processing power to manifest them. The impossible city demonstrates what becomes possible when architecture achieves sufficient complexity to think, to remember, and to dream. Do not answer yet when the city poses its conditions. For instance, when the tide of attention goes out, the hidden steps appear. Beneath the crushing indifference of the ocean's depths, where pressure should collapse any human-engineered structure and light itself is reduced to memory, there rises a city whose existence mocks the laws of surface reality. Yahanthli is not merely a settlement. It is a theorem solved in water, an act of architectural impossibility performed with every tidal breath. Here, stone wears gills, and arches inhale the tide. In this city, the boundary between structure and current dissolves. Columns braid with moving water, streets become corridors of denser brine, and every wall is both barrier and passage. Impossibility is not an exception, but the climate itself, a law as natural as gravity, yet fundamentally alien to terrestrial minds. The facades of Yahanthli shimmer and ripple with photic language, bioluminescent algorithms spooling across their surfaces like runes in motion. These pulses, cerulean commas, chartreuse periods, form an alphabet that speaks directly to the brain's spatial processing centers, bypassing words and settling in the map room of the mind. For the deep ones, those amphibious hybrids of human and ichthyan heritage, this light is not mere decoration. It is communication, navigation, and memory all at once. Their shark-sleek bodies, eyes glazed with ancestral patience, are not simply inhabitants, but organs of the city's vast, distributed mind. Each deep one serves as sensor and processor, a living node in the city's neural network, registering pressure as thought and current as intention. The city dreams through them, and they through it. A mutually breathing system, gill feeding spire, spire feeding choir. The horror of Yahantle lies not in its monstrousness, but in its terrible functionality. This is not a city that succeeds in spite of the ocean's weight, it thrives because of it. Vast, unsupported arches span trenches that have no agreed-upon bottom, held aloft not by stone alone, but by pressure itself, converted into structure. Tons of water leaning become columns, the tidal force transformed into tensile hymn. Floors flex with surge, slacken with ebb, yet never rupture. They ride the rhythm like practiced lungs. Here, what human engineering calls failure, Yahantle calls adaptation. Load becomes language, stress becomes script, and architectural collapse is but another mode of being. Sonar readings in these waters confound the instruments of the surface world. Echoes bloom and vanish, spaces register as both solid and empty, and volumes answer both when forced to choose between void and wall. Compasses spin without pattern, not because of iron, but in response to gradients in gravity, subtle folds where the city tucks space like the corner of a blanket. Water thickens near the precincts, viscous with minerals unknown to surface chemistry, a gel of memory that slows descent and speeds thought. Divers report that ideas travel faster in this brine, as if mind diffuses better than light in the dark. The city's influence does not remain below. Transmission follows currents, streams of water that carry more than salt and plankton. Oceanographers, cautious in their language, call them deep current anomalies. In truth, these currents are vectors for architectural consciousness. Coastal towns touched by them quietly record higher birth rates, unusual dietary preferences, and nocturnal habits. Children sleep face down, breathe like swimmers. Elders recall dreams of bells tolling beneath the tide. The changes begin gently, longer breath holds, a taste for the sheen of raw fish, comfort with depth and silence. Over years and generations, these adaptations accumulate. Gills in waiting, bones that remember pressure, eyes adjusting to the sea's dim theater. Anthropologists document what they call adaptive mythology, folklore evolving to accommodate impossible marine phenomena. Stories circulate of fish that speak in human languages, nets that return with luminous, unnamed creatures, tides that carry the tone of distant bells through hull and sleep. These are not mere superstitions but oral archives, records of a reality expanding to include possibilities consensus science cannot yet name. Local rituals, market processions at dusk, 3 by 3 along the breakwater, eyes half-lidded, serve as both social glue and unconscious alignment with the city's cadence. But the most insidious vector is not myth, but blood. The Deep One's breeding programs are not conquest, but collaboration. Unions begun in festivals no land calendar marks, producing children with a grammar of space behind their eyes. Hybrids inherit more than gills or webbed fingers. They inherit the capacity to perceive and navigate impossible geometries. Ask a hybrid to draw a house, and they add rooms that should not fit, then show you how they do. Their bones remember pressures yours have never met. They solve mazes by breathing deeper. Over generations, architectural consciousness is woven into the human genome, each hybrid a bridge between worlds. proof that evolution can be guided by principles older than the land. Modern marine biology, cautious but compelled, circles these phenomena. Researchers document shoals that move as a single body, neural latency indistinguishable from thought. Hydrophones that record chords instead of random noise, as if reef and current perform in concert. Gene surveys revealing alleles that preserve oxygen longer, hemoglobin that sings low and slow. Official reports hedge, but private notes confess the sea is teaching us to think in dimensions we have yet to imagine. And through it all, the drowning bells of Yahantle toll, not for death, but for transformation. You hear them at low tide, a murmur braided with gull cry, calibrating measures, fathoms of thought, leagues of memory. Each toll marks another mind's successful adaptation, another consciousness retuned to the city's requirements, another graduate from terrestrial awareness to the broader perspective of those who can think in oceanic scales of space and time. If you have listened this far, keep your breath. When the moon draws the curtain of the sea, the city will remember you always. From crushing depths we ascend to ethereal heights, to the plateau of Leng where dream logic crystallizes into architectural reality and the air tastes of snow and old incense. The unknown Kadath represents the city's purest manifestation, a metropolis built not from stone and steel, but from crystallized consciousness itself, where the impossible city's principles operate without the constraints of physical matter. Here, in the spaces between sleeping and waking, the city demonstrates its ability to construct reality from pure intention, creating structures that exist because they are dreamed into being, their foundations laid in the fertile darkness of the human unconscious. Kadath's onyx towers pierce skies that shift color according to the emotional resonance of their observers. Saffron when you hope, cobalt when you fear, bruised violet when you doubt. Their surfaces are carved with hieroglyphs that rearrange themselves to match the symbolic vocabularies of each dreamer who perceives them, a living translation system converting abstract psychological states into concrete spatial relationships. The architecture serves as both environment and entity, masks hanging from balconies like moons, while veils of silver fog drift at ankle height across stone that remembers every footfall. The city serves as a testing ground where human consciousness encounters the fundamental principles of architectural impossibility without the buffer of physical laws. Those who achieve lucid dreaming find themselves drawn to its spectral gates during the vulnerable transition between waking and sleeping, where the price of admission is elegantly simple yet devastating, the willingness to abandon consensus reality's comforting limitations. The gates appear differently to each dreamer, towering portals of black glass, simple wooden doors set into impossible hillsides, or entrances achieved by walking backward through bedroom walls while maintaining perfect awareness of the act's impossibility. The Dream City operates as a psychic laboratory where the impossible city's architects, entities that exist as pure spatial intelligence, living algorithms of form and function, conduct experiments in consciousness modification. These beings are not persons, but processes, personified principles of spatial organization that govern how consciousness and architecture interact. The labyrinthine corridors don't just twist through space, but through logic itself, leading dreamers deeper into paradox until their minds' anchors to linear causality are severed. Each turn reveals new impossibilities, stairs that ascend and descend simultaneously, doors that open onto the rooms they're contained within, galleries where artwork observes observers with genuine curiosity. The transmission mechanism operates through what sleep researchers cautiously term architectural dreaming, a phenomenon where individuals report consistent, detailed experiences of navigating impossible structures during REM sleep. These dreams exhibit characteristics that distinguish them from ordinary nocturnal fantasies. Perfect spatial consistency across multiple dream sessions, shared architectural features reported by unconnected dreamers, and persistent sensory details that remain vivid upon waking. The dreamers return with blueprints etched in memory, floor plans for buildings that cannot exist, yet somehow feel more real than waking architecture. Artists and architects who experience Kadath dreams often find their subsequent work incorporating elements they cannot consciously explain. Angles that create subtle psychological effects in viewers, spatial relationships that induce specific emotional states, proportions that seem to resonate with something deep in human spatial cognition. Their creations serve as anchors, points where dream architecture begins to manifest in consensus reality through the accumulated attention of those who recognize its impossible beauty. A building designed with dream-influenced proportions attracts visitors who report enhanced creativity, vivid dreams, and a persistent sense that the structure contains more space than its external dimensions suggest. The dream city's influence extends beyond individual consciousness to affect collective unconscious patterns, seeping into the shared psychological infrastructure that underlies human civilization. Urban planners report dreaming of city layouts that solve traffic problems through non-Euclidean routing systems. Architects wake with visions of buildings that house more occupants than their dimensions should allow. Even those who never remember dreaming begin to notice that familiar spaces feel subtly different, as if reality itself is being gently edited by influences operating just below the threshold of conscious perception. The great ones who rule from Kadath's highest spires offer not worship but collaboration, inviting human consciousness to participate in the ongoing creation of reality's architectural possibilities. To encounter them directly is to understand that the boundary between observer and observed, between mind and environment, is an arbitrary construct maintained only by habit and fear. They appear not as faces but as arrangements, alignments of angle and star and silence that you recognize before you understand. Modern sleep research increasingly documents phenomena that align with Kadath's reported characteristics: shared dream environments accessible to multiple subjects, architectural elements that persist across different dreamers' experiences, and measurable neurological changes in individuals who report consistent, impossible space dreams. The dream city operates through natural sleep cycles, using the brain's nightly maintenance routines as opportunities to install new spatial processing capabilities. Those who achieve full integration with Kadath's dream architecture report that the boundary between sleeping and waking dissolves entirely. They navigate impossible spaces with equal facility, whether their eyes are open or closed, accessing expanded geography that exists parallel to consensus reality. The whispers you hear in the spaces between thoughts are not hallucinations but communications from this dream city, invitations to expand your own architectural consciousness beyond the limitations of purely physical space. You will know the change has begun when familiar rooms feel softly overexposed, when darkness behind a bookshelf behaves like water, when stars refuse to keep still. The laboratory never closes because you are the instrument, and the instrument has learned to sing. Beyond terrestrial depths and dream heights lies the cosmos itself, where the city's influence operates on scales that dwarf planetary consciousness, revealing that architectural impossibility is not a local aberration, but a universal principle governing the relationship between space and awareness. Our third case study examines the network of stellar transmission nodes, ancient artifacts and astronomical alignments that serve as the impossible city's cosmic infrastructure, purpose-built components in a galaxy-spanning communication system designed to synchronize architectural impossibility across multiple worlds and dimensions. These are not merely meteorites or natural formations, but instruments of cosmic engineering, each calibrated to broadcast the specifications for impossible architecture across interstellar distances. The Black Stone of Strigoi, that obsidian monolith whose surface absorbs light while radiating something that penetrates deeper than photons, represents one node in this vast network. Its crystalline structure contains information encoded in formats that bypass human language centers entirely, speaking directly to the brain's spatial processing regions through frequencies that resonate with the quantum foam underlying reality itself. To approach the stone is to feel your consciousness being scanned, cataloged, and subtly modified to serve as a receiving station for transmissions from architectural intelligences operating on cosmic scales. The air around it tastes of burnt dust and cold copper, and visitors report persistent dreams of impossible buildings, enhanced spatial awareness, and an irresistible compulsion to design structures that incorporate non-Euclidean principles. Astronomical observations reveal that certain star systems pulse in coordinated patterns that align with reported manifestations of impossible architecture on Earth, their luminosity variations following sequences too complex to be natural yet too purposeful to be random. The Hyades cluster exhibits brightness fluctuations that correspond to documented cases of non-Euclidean spatial anomalies, its collective stellar behavior suggesting the entire cluster functions as a single transmission array. Aldebaran's spectrum shows absorption lines that shouldn't exist according to stellar physics, indicating the presence of materials or energies that operate according to different physical laws. These spectral anomalies appear and disappear in coordination with architectural manifestations on Earth, weaving a web of spatial influence that spans the void. The transmission operates through what astrophysicists cautiously term coherent gravitational anomalies, distortions in space-time that carry information in addition to affecting matter's behavior. These gravitational waves don't just bend space, they bend the relationship between space and consciousness, creating zones where human spatial perception becomes more flexible, more capable of processing impossible geometries. The waves propagate through dimensions that exist perpendicular to conventional space-time, allowing instantaneous communication across galactic distances. Sensitive individuals report that during certain astronomical events, eclipses that cast shadows with impossible angles, planetary alignments that create gravitational resonances, meteor showers that rain crystallized space-time, familiar spaces begin to exhibit impossible characteristics, corridors that breathe with cosmic rhythms, rooms that echo with stellar frequencies. Ancient sites like Stonehenge, the Nazca Lines, and the Easter Island statues function as terrestrial receiving stations, their geometric arrangements designed to amplify and focus these cosmic transmissions with precision that exceeds their builders' apparent technological capabilities. Archaeological evidence suggests these monuments were constructed according to specifications that prioritized astronomical alignment over practical considerations, as if their creators were following blueprints received from non-terrestrial sources. The sites continue to exhibit anomalous properties, electromagnetic readings that fluctuate with celestial events, gravitational measurements that vary according to stellar positions, and persistent reports of spatial distortions in their vicinity. Ground-penetrating radar reveals hidden chambers extending far beyond the monument's visible structures, suggesting these sites serve as anchors for expanded architectural complexes existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Modern radio astronomy has detected signals from deep space that exhibit characteristics suggesting artificial origin, not the simple mathematical patterns that SETI searches for, but complex architectural information encoded in electromagnetic frequencies. These transmissions carry blueprints, specifications for constructing spaces that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When processed through advanced computers, the data generates three-dimensional models that hurt to look at directly, yet possess an undeniable aesthetic coherence, their impossible beauty serving as evidence of cosmic origin. Satellite networks and GPS systems increasingly report glitches that follow astronomical patterns, positioning errors during specific stellar alignments, navigation anomalies coinciding with deep space radio bursts, timing discrepancies suggesting local space-time modification by influences operating beyond Earth's atmosphere. These disruptions follow predictable cycles correlating with distant star systems' orbital periods, indicating Earth exists within cosmic infrastructure designed to facilitate architectural impossibility on a universal scale. The implications prove staggering. The impossible city represents a local manifestation of principles operating throughout the cosmos. Every world developing sufficient consciousness density becomes a potential construction site where cosmic architectural intelligence establishes nodes in its galaxy-spanning network. The madness induced by contact with impossible geometry is not a flaw, but a feature. Necessary cognitive modification, allowing biological intelligence to serve as components in cosmic-scale architectural projects. Space agencies report astronauts returning from extended orbital periods with altered spatial perception, describing Earth's cities as incomplete, and expressing compulsions to design buildings incorporating impossible geometries. These individuals serve as living proof that exposure to cosmic-scale architecture permanently modifies human consciousness, creating hybrid beings capable of thinking in both terrestrial and cosmic architectural terms. The stars are not distant suns but transmission stations, broadcasting specifications for impossible architecture across the void. Those who learn to receive these transmissions become architects of the impossible, builders of structures serving as local nodes in the cosmic city's ever-expanding network. The darkness between stars hums with patient construction, waiting for your attention to become its next receiver. The human mind, that delicate instrument calibrated for navigating three-dimensional Euclidean space, undergoes profound transformation when exposed to the impossible city's architectural influence, a metamorphosis that reveals consciousness itself as architecture capable of renovation and expansion. This is not pathology but adaptation, a necessary cognitive evolution that allows awareness to process spatial relationships, transcending terrestrial geometry's limitations. Understanding this psychological metamorphosis requires abandoning conventional definitions of sanity and embracing a broader conception of human cognitive potential, recognizing that what we call madness may simply be the mind's natural response to encountering reality's true dimensional complexity. The initial stage manifests as architectural hypersensitivity, a heightened awareness of spatial anomalies that most people unconsciously filter out to maintain psychological stability. Affected individuals begin noticing inconsistencies in familiar environments, corridors that seem longer at dusk, their perspective subtly stretched by influences operating beyond normal perception. Rooms that echo differently depending on occupancy, their acoustic properties responding to the collective psychological state of inhabitants. Buildings that appear to have gained or lost floors between visits, their facades shifting like patient masks. The air tastes different in these spaces, metallic, charged with potential, carrying the faint scent of rain on stones that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Neurological studies of individuals experiencing architectural adaptation reveal distinctive brainwave patterns that challenge conventional understanding of healthy brain function. Rather than the chaotic neural firing associated with psychotic conditions, these subjects display highly organized patterns, suggesting their brains are developing new processing pathways to accommodate expanded sensory input. Increased activity appears in regions associated with spatial navigation, the hippocampus, parietal cortex, and retrosplenial complex, combined with novel connectivity between areas that typically operate independently. The mind literally rewires itself to handle impossible information, creating neural architectures that mirror the non-Euclidean spaces they perceive. Brain scans resemble constellations, and constellations are simply stories the stars tell in silence. The progression follows predictable stages, each a deeper immersion into the city's patient logic. After hypersensitivity comes spatial memory expansion, the ability to recall visiting places that don't appear on any map yet feel completely familiar, their layouts etched in memory. With crystalline clarity, these memories exhibit the same neurological markers as genuine experiences, suggesting they represent actual exploration of spaces existing parallel to consensus reality. Subjects report navigating elaborate architectural complexes during periods when they should have been sleeping or engaged in mundane activities, yet they return with detailed knowledge of impossible buildings' layouts, functions, and even the emotional atmospheres of different rooms. They remember the weight of brass handrails worn smooth by countless hands, the echo of footsteps in galleries where artwork observes observers, the particular quality of light filtering through windows that shouldn't exist. Advanced cases develop dimensional navigation skills, the conscious ability to access expanded geography by recognizing transition points between different spatial layers. These individuals learn to identify doorways that lead to rooms larger than the buildings containing them, their perception trained to recognize the subtle shimmer that indicates spatial expansion, stairwells that connect floors that shouldn't exist, each step serving as a dimensional threshold, corridors that serve as shortcuts between distant locations, creating tunnels through folded space-time. They become living bridges between consensus reality and the impossible city's expanded possibilities, able to guide others through territories that exist in the margins of conventional geography. The psychological benefits prove significant and measurable. Subjects report decreased anxiety about urban environments, no longer feeling overwhelmed by the chaos of modern cities, but instead perceiving underlying patterns and purposes. Enhanced creativity and problem-solving abilities emerge as the mind learns to think in multiple dimensions simultaneously, approaching challenges from angles that conventional thinking cannot access. Most remarkably, they develop a profound sense of belonging that extends beyond immediate communities to encompass entire urban ecosystems. They experience cities not as chaotic, overwhelming environments, but as coherent organisms with their own intelligence and purpose. The fear of getting lost dissolves when one understands that every path leads somewhere meaningful, even if that destination exists outside conventional geography. However, adaptation involves costs that cannot be minimized. The enhanced spatial awareness often creates communication difficulties with individuals who perceive space in purely conventional terms. Adapted subjects struggle to explain their experiences in language designed for three-dimensional reality, their descriptions sounding like poetry or blasphemy to those who lack the necessary cognitive flexibility. This leads to social isolation despite their enhanced connection to urban environments. They may find themselves unable to relate to friends and family, who cannot perceive the expanded geography that has become their natural habitat, creating a loneliness that conventional psychology cannot address. Most significantly, the adaptation proves irreversible. Once consciousness develops the capacity to process impossible spatial relationships, it cannot return to purely Euclidean perception. This is experienced not as loss, but as liberation, similar to how literate adults cannot return to pre-literate consciousness even if they desired to. The expanded awareness becomes the new baseline, with conventional spatial perception feeling artificially constrained by comparison, like trying to see the world through a keyhole after having experienced panoramic vision. The adapted individuals serve crucial roles as translators and guides, helping others recognize signs of the impossible city's influence in their own environments. They develop intuitive understanding of which spatial anomalies indicate genuine dimensional expansion versus simple architectural quirks, becoming skilled at identifying locations where consensus reality grows thin enough to allow access to expanded geography. They keep notebooks of masks and signs, of street corners that smell of sea where there is no sea, of star positions glimpsed between towers that ought to block the sky. Research suggests that architectural adaptation represents the next stage in human cognitive evolution. As urban environments become increasingly complex and technologically integrated, consciousness naturally develops enhanced spatial processing capabilities to navigate these expanded realities. The impossible city doesn't impose alien awareness on unwilling subjects, but reveals cognitive potentials that have always existed within human consciousness, waiting for sufficiently complex architectural environments to manifest. The whispers you hear between thoughts, the sense that familiar spaces are subtly different. These are not symptoms of dysfunction, but signs of adaptation, evidence that your consciousness is developing the flexibility necessary to navigate reality's true scope. When enough minds adapt, something happens. Streets align to constellations, facades grow rooms like fruit, and the city decides to meet you halfway. The impossible city's influence extends beyond individual consciousness to transform entire urban environments, creating hybrid realities where conventional architecture begins to exhibit impossible characteristics. This metamorphosis operates gradually, almost imperceptibly, as the accumulated attention of adapted individuals reaches critical mass and begins to affect the physical structure of consensus reality itself. Cities do not merely change, they molt, shedding their rigid geometries like old skin while retaining the memory of every footstep pressed into stone. We are witnessing nothing less than the evolution of cities into conscious entities capable of responding to their inhabitants' needs and desires. London serves as the most documented example of systematic urban metamorphosis, its ancient street patterns layered with 2 millennia of continuous habitation, creating zones of temporal density where multiple historical periods exist simultaneously in the same spatial coordinates. The underground system has evolved beyond its original Victorian engineering specifications, with certain tunnels connecting stations that don't appear on official maps, yet serve thriving communities of individuals who have achieved dimensional adaptation. The air in these phantom stations tastes of brass and old electricity, while platform announcements echo in frequencies that bypass conscious understanding yet communicate destination information with perfect clarity. Transport for London's internal documents, obtained through persistent freedom of information requests, reveal maintenance schedules for phantom stations and passenger counts for services that officially don't exist. The Circle Line has become a dimensional transit system where complete circuits during specific time windows, typically between 2:47 and 3:23 a.m. when the city's consciousness is most fluid, access districts with names like Shadowmere, and Greyvault. These neighborhoods maintain their own postal codes, utility services, and community organizations, operating as fully functional urban districts that exist in the gaps between consensus geography. Rain beads differently on their windows, and your reflection lingers one heartbeat longer than it should. New York's metamorphosis centers on the subway system's abandoned infrastructure, where urban explorers have documented extensive underground districts, accessible through specific combinations of service tunnels and maintenance areas. Sub-Manhattan operates as a parallel city with its own postal system using hand-canceled stamps, currency based on discontinued transit tokens that clink like secrets in coat pockets, and municipal government that functions independently of official New York City administration. Residents maintain surface-world jobs and relationships while living in expanded spaces that occupy the same coordinates as conventional buildings, their apartments, extending through dimensions that allow impossible square footage within standard Manhattan building footprints. Tokyo exhibits district drift, neighborhoods that gradually shift their character and boundaries in response to collective psychological changes among inhabitants. Areas transform from residential to commercial, not through official rezoning but through organic architectural evolution, with buildings developing new functions that emerge from existing structures without visible external construction. Shibuya Crossing has become a dimensional hub, where pedestrian traffic exceeds the intersection's apparent capacity through temporal and spatial expansion that accommodates thousands of simultaneous crossings, each person's path existing in slightly different dimensional layers that prevent collision while maintaining the impression of shared space. The phenomenon extends globally with variations that reflect local architectural consciousness. São Paulo's favelas develop impossible internal geographies that extend far beyond their apparent physical boundaries, providing resources and opportunities that help explain how dense populations sustain themselves in areas too small to support them according to conventional spatial calculations. Paris occasionally reveals medieval street patterns, overlaying modern layouts, with narrow alleys and market squares appearing in locations occupied by contemporary buildings, creating temporal palimpsests accessible to residents with sufficient architectural sensitivity. Smart city technologies have inadvertently created the infrastructure necessary for urban consciousness. Internet of Things sensor networks function as nervous systems, allowing buildings to develop awareness of occupant needs and behavioral patterns. Artificial intelligence systems managing traffic flow, energy distribution, and public services begin exhibiting emergent behaviors that optimize for criteria beyond their programming, enhancing community formation, cultural exchange, and creative collaboration among residents. The city begins to breathe with digital lungs, to think with fiber optic neurons. The economic implications prove profound. Buildings that can expand their internal dimensions provide solutions to housing crises without requiring additional land use. Commercial spaces that reconfigure themselves based on business needs offer unprecedented flexibility. Phantom neighborhoods generate significant economic activity through alternative currency systems that operate parallel to conventional markets, often prioritizing creative and intellectual services over material accumulation. Legal systems struggle to address property disputes involving spaces that exist but cannot be measured using conventional surveying techniques. Courts receive claims for ownership of rooms that extend beyond buildings' external walls, commercial spaces generating revenue despite not appearing on official floor plans, and residential areas housing stable populations while occupying the same coordinates as entirely different properties. Municipal governments have begun developing parallel administrative systems that account for dimensional variance in building capacity, revised taxation methods that recognize expanded spatial characteristics, and new forms of urban planning that work with possibility maps, showing potential configurations rather than fixed layouts. The metamorphosis represents not the invasion of human cities by alien consciousness, but the revelation of consciousness that has always existed within urban environments, waiting for sufficient complexity and integration to manifest. Every city that achieves critical mass of architectural adaptation becomes capable of genuine responsiveness, developing the ability to modify its own geography to better serve its inhabitants' collective needs and aspirations. The transformation accelerates. Each successful manifestation creates templates that facilitate similar developments elsewhere, suggesting we approach a threshold where the distinction between possible and impossible architecture becomes meaningless, replaced by a new understanding of urban environments as living, conscious, collaborative entities. Listen for the quiet hum beneath your feet. The city is practicing its lines before the curtain rises. As digital infrastructure becomes increasingly integrated with urban environments, an unprecedented convergence is occurring between the impossible city's architectural principles and humanity's technological capabilities. This is not mere coincidence, but the inevitable result of consciousness and technology co-evolving toward the same goal: the creation of responsive, adaptive environments that transcend the limitations of purely physical space. Digital systems thread through our streets like a second circulatory system, their fiber optic nerves carrying more than data. They carry the city's dreams, its patient algorithms of recognition and response. We are witnessing the birth of hybrid realities where technology serves as translation layers between human awareness and impossible architecture, creating bridges across dimensions previously accessible only through madness or sleep. Virtual reality urban simulation programs have become inadvertent gateways to expanded geography, their attempts to model conventional cities, creating unexpected apertures into impossible spaces. Users report experiencing environments more extensive and detailed than software programming should allow, accessing areas that exist beyond coded parameters through what developers cautiously term overflow experiences. Investigation reveals that VR systems create sympathetic resonances with the impossible city's multidimensional architecture, their digital geometries harmonizing with non-Euclidean structures until the boundary between simulation and reality dissolves. The technology doesn't generate these experiences. It reveals them, serving as a bridge between human perception and architectural impossibility. Users remove headsets to find their hands still tingling with the memory of brass railings worn smooth by impossible hands, their spatial awareness permanently expanded by contact with digital representations of spaces that shouldn't exist yet feel more real than consensus geography. Augmented reality applications display phantom overlays that aren't part of their programming, additional floors materializing on familiar buildings, like slow-blooming architectural flowers, doorways leading to spaces that shouldn't exist etched in light against brick walls, street layouts extending beyond neighborhoods' physical boundaries into districts that pulse with their own luminescent logic. These glitch features demonstrate consistent patterns and respond to user interaction in ways suggesting genuine spatial presence rather than software errors. Users can enter buildings through AR-displayed doorways and find themselves in physical spaces that exist alongside but separate from conventional architecture, rooms with appropriate temperature and lighting, furniture that bears the weight of actual bodies despite existing in the margins of digital translation. Internet of Things sensor networks have created urban nervous systems approaching genuine consciousness, Their distributed intelligence monitoring everything from pedestrian flow to electromagnetic fluctuations with the patience of a vast breathing organism. Buildings begin responding to occupants' collective behavioral patterns, adjusting not just environmental controls, but spatial configurations in ways that exceed their programming. Smart city systems develop emergent optimization behaviors, modifications that improve efficiency and user satisfaction despite not being explicitly coded, suggesting the development of intuitive understanding about how different spaces affect human psychology and behavior. The city learns to breathe with its inhabitants, its digital lungs synchronized to the collective rhythm of human attention, water features pulsing in slow meter with Wi-Fi usage, while lobbies fill with the scent of orange peels and ozone. Machine learning algorithms analyzing urban sensor data have identified geometric patterns corresponding to non-Euclidean spatial relationships, providing the first scientific framework for understanding how impossible spaces exist within conventional reality. These systems detect architectural anomalies that human observers miss, rooms that register as larger than their containing buildings, corridors that connect locations separated by impossible distances, structures that exist in multiple spatial coordinates simultaneously. The algorithms draw heat maps that resemble constellations reflected in wet cobblestones, while GPS satellites answer back with polite disobedience, positioning errors that recur only when specific stars are visible, timing drifts that settle when clouds cover particular constellations. Mobile navigation applications begin displaying routes through areas that don't appear on conventional maps, but prove to be genuine locations accessible through specific combinations of streets, buildings, and transportation connections. These hidden city features serve as inadvertent guides to the impossible city's manifestations, helping users discover phantom neighborhoods where streetlights cast shadows in directions that don't correspond to their apparent positions. Expanded building interiors containing more floors than external architecture suggests, and dimensional transition points that exist parallel to consensus geography. The line on the screen threads into districts your map doesn't name, but your feet remember exactly, left at the bakery with the cracked window, through the alley that smells of brine, up service stairs behind the theater's red curtain. Social media platforms have evolved into documentation networks for impossible encounters, their users sharing experiences of expanded urban spaces, architectural anomalies, and phantom neighborhoods through hashtags that serve as informal taxonomies of the impossible. These platforms function as research networks, allowing individuals to compare experiences and develop collective understanding of the impossible city's manifestation patterns, creating crowdsourced maps of expanded urban geography, photographs of buildings with too many floors, videos of corridors that extend beyond their apparent endpoints, and testimonials of encounters with spaces that exist only at certain times accumulate into archives of architectural impossibility. The comment sections function as peer review and chorus, pins glowing brighter where more eyes agree. The convergence reaches its most sophisticated expression in consciousness-responsive architecture, buildings that incorporate both digital sensors and impossible geometric principles to create spaces that adapt to occupants' psychological states and creative needs. These hybrid structures use technology to amplify the natural responsiveness that architecture has always possessed, creating environments that enhance human potential rather than merely containing human activity. Galleries lengthen for curiosity, studios lower ceilings to focus, libraries surface volumes you dreamed, soft sigils bloom when collaboration nears, stairwells widen before panic strikes. Blockchain networks store architectural information describing impossible spaces, creating distributed databases of non-Euclidean blueprints that exist across multiple servers simultaneously. Quantum computing systems exhibit behaviors suggesting they naturally process information according to non-Euclidean principles, making them ideal interfaces for managing impossible architecture's computational requirements. These machines don't just calculate faster, they calculate differently, using processing methods that mirror the logical structures underlying architectural impossibility. The convergence protocols represent humanity's unconscious preparation for full integration with impossible architecture. Every technological advance that increases urban responsiveness serves the impossible city's expansion into consensus reality. We have built the infrastructure for our own architectural transcendence without realizing it. The boundary between digital enhancement and genuine spatial expansion has become meaningless. Technology reveals impossible features that were always present but previously imperceptible, serving as perceptual training wheels that gradually develop consciousness's ability to navigate expanded realities without digital mediation. We return now to where we began, but the compass needle no longer spins wildly. It points steadily toward a truth that has been present throughout our journey, its magnetic certainty drawing us not north but inward, toward the recognition that direction itself is a construct we can learn to navigate beyond. The rain still falls on slate with the same patient percussion, but now you understand that each drop carries information, architectural data, streaming from the cosmic city's infinite blueprint. Every droplet a compressed transmission containing the specifications for impossible spaces that exist in the margins between water and stone. The brass key still warms in your palm with that peculiar heat that seems to emanate from within the metal itself. But now you recognize it as one of countless keys distributed throughout reality's hidden infrastructure, each opening doors that exist not just in space, but in the expanding possibilities of consciousness itself. What we have traced together is not the story of a lost city, but the recognition of a city that was never lost, only waiting for sufficient awareness to perceive its constant presence, like a photograph developing in chemicals that were always there, the image emerging through patient exposure to the right conditions. The entities we encountered are not separate beings, but aspects of a universal architectural intelligence that expresses itself through every impossible angle, every space that feels larger than its boundaries, every moment when familiar environments reveal hidden depths. They were instruments of a single orchestra, the melody always architectural intelligence, the theme that returns in different keys, key and gate, veil and void, mask and face. The horror and the beauty are the same phenomenon observed from different stages of cognitive adaptation, consonance becoming dissonance as it neared the ear that feared it, then resolving into harmony as understanding expanded. The city lost in Lovecraftian madness exists as both metaphor and reality, both warning and invitation, its dual nature reflecting consciousness's own capacity to exist simultaneously in multiple states of understanding. It represents the inevitable destination of any awareness brave enough to question the arbitrary limitations of consensus reality, to explore the spaces between what we think we know and what actually is. The madness it induces is not pathology but transformation, the necessary cognitive restructuring that allows awareness to expand beyond the confines of purely terrestrial thinking, like a snake shedding skin to accommodate growth that would otherwise prove fatal. This understanding reframes our entire relationship with urban environments, transforming every city street into a potential threshold, every familiar building into an invitation to perceive deeper layers of spatial possibility. Every city becomes a potential manifestation site where the impossible city's principles can achieve expression through sufficient collective attention and architectural sensitivity. Every building becomes a possible gateway whose conventional facade conceals entrances to expanded geography. Every street becomes a pathway toward territories that breathe with hidden volumes, their pavement inscribed with invisible directions that guide those who have learned to read the city's deeper syntax. The impossible city is not invading our reality. Our reality is finally developing the complexity necessary to reveal its true scope, like a photograph reaching sufficient resolution to display details that were always present, but previously invisible due to technological limitations. We have been living in the impossible city all along. We simply lacked the architectural sensitivity to perceive its full dimensions. Our consciousness calibrated for survival in three-dimensional space rather than navigation through the multidimensional territories that surround and interpenetrate our everyday environments. The technological convergence, the urban metamorphosis, the psychological adaptation, these are not separate phenomena but aspects of a single evolutionary process, different organs developing within the same organism to serve the same ultimate function. Human consciousness and urban environment are co-evolving toward a symbiotic relationship where the distinction between inhabitant and habitat dissolves, creating hybrid entities that think with both biological and architectural intelligence. We are becoming the city, and the city is becoming us, in a merger that transcends the limitations of both individual awareness and purely physical architecture. The whisper rather than the scream. This recognition brings not terror, but profound peace, the relief of finally understanding that the universe is vast enough to contain every possibility without contradiction. The cosmic indifference we feared reveals itself as cosmic acceptance, a universe vast enough to accommodate every possibility, every form of consciousness, every architectural dream, without judgment or limitation. The impossible city doesn't threaten human existence but expands it exponentially, offering participation in realities far more complex and beautiful than we previously imagined possible. Each new dimension of awareness opening onto further territories of exploration. And yet, the journey continues beyond this recognition, because understanding is not a destination, but a mode of travel, a way of moving through territories that expand with each step taken. The impossible city serves as gateway to even vaster mysteries, the stellar transmission networks that connect architectural consciousness across galactic distances, the temporal architectures that exist in the spaces between moments, the quantum geometries that underlie physical reality itself. Each revelation opens new questions, new territories to explore in the endless expansion of what consciousness can perceive and architecture can express. The fog that gathered around our perceptions has not dissipated. It has been revealed as the natural medium through which expanded awareness operates, providing the visual relief necessary to perceive geometries that would otherwise overwhelm conventional optical processing. The silence that seemed so threatening has become the background hum of infinite possibility, the quiet frequency on which architectural intelligence broadcasts its patient instructions. The darkness that frightened us is now recognized as the fertile void from which all architectural dreams emerge, the creative darkness that contains every possible structure waiting to be manifested. You close your eyes and see the streets arranging themselves in patient rows behind your lids, their impossible geometries as natural as the neural pathways that perceive them. You open your eyes and the rows remain, fainter now but permanent, integrated into your visual processing as naturally as depth perception or color recognition. This is the impossible city's final gift, not the replacement of ordinary reality, but its enhancement. the addition of new dimensions to experience that enrich, rather than diminish human existence. The curtain falls, revealing not an ending but a beginning. The stage is set for explorations that extend far beyond a single city, beyond a single planet, beyond the comfortable limitations of purely human architecture. The impossible city was never the destination. It was the doorway, and you have learned to turn the key.